Let's talk about cyberterrorism in the cloud. I mean, it sounds like something straight out of a movie, right? This big, scary threat where technology and fear kind of collide. But what is it really? Well, in this explainer, we're going to peel back all that hype and figure out what's actually going on. You know, this quote from our source material really just hits the nail on the head. People are afraid of things that are invisible and things that they don't understand. And just think about it for a second. We've got the cloud, this invisible thing we use every single day, and then you have cyberterrorism, this threat that, let's be honest, most of us don't really get. And that combination, it's basically a perfect recipe for fear.
So that's the big question, isn't it? What really happens when these two misunderstood, invisible forces smash into each other? Is the cloud suddenly a new superweapon for terrorists? Is it a giant vulnerable new target? Or is the reality, maybe a little more complicated than that? Let's find out. Okay, before we can even begin to answer that, we have to cut through some of the noise, all the jargon. To really get a handle on the threat, we've got to understand what we're even talking about. So let's demystify these terms, starting with a word you probably use, a dozen times a day.
Seriously, think about it for a second. When you hear the cloud, what do you picture in your head? For a lot of people, it's this kind of vague, almost magical place up in the sky where all our photos and files live. But where it really comes from is way more down to earth. So let's just get this out of the way right now. It has absolutely nothing to do with satellites or the weather or anything that's actually, up in the sky. And the real answer is, well, it's actually pretty simple. For decades, whenever engineers were drawing out diagrams of computer networks, they needed a symbol for the internet, that big, complex thing connecting everything together. So what they draw? A cloud. That's it. That's the whole story. So from now on, when you hear the cloud, just think the internet.
All right, on to our second term, terrorism. Now, its meaning has changed over time. It actually started way back in the 1790s to talk about terror caused by the government. But today, since around the 1960s, when we say terrorism, we're usually talking about politically motivated violence that targets civilians, all designed to spread fear and send a really loud message.
And that finally brings us to cyberterrorism. So you put the two words together, the term's actually been around since the early 80s, but here's the kicker. Even today, the experts still can't agree on one single definition. And that ambiguity, that's not just some nerdy detail. It's actually at the very heart of this whole problem. This lack of a clear definition leads us to what is probably the single most important distinction we need to make today. We have to separate the Hollywood hype from the actual reality. And we do that by understanding the difference between using cyberspace as a weapon and just using it as a tool. This right here, this slide, lays it all out. On the left, you've got actual cyberterrorism. That's using computers as a weapon to cause real-world physical harm, casualties, mass terror. But on the right, you have what is way, way more common. Terrorists using the internet simply as a tool to organize, communicate, and spread their message. Getting this difference is everything. So what does it look like when they use it as a tool? Well, it looks a lot like how any other group might use the internet. They're on social media pushing propaganda, they're recruiting people from all over the world, they're sharing training manuals, raising money with crypto, and talking to each other to plan things. They even use everyday tools like Google Maps to scout out potential targets. And this is a really, really crucial point. The bar for something to be considered genuine cyberterrorism is incredibly high. We're not talking about messing up a website or causing a temporary service outage. We're talking about a digital attack that causes the same kind of large-scale, real-world damage and terror as a physical bombing. Which, of course, leads to the obvious question, have we actually seen an attack like that? Well, not really. Even famous cyber attacks like the Stuxnet worm that hit Iran's nuclear program, experts classify that more as cyber warfare, one state attacking another, not cyber terrorism. True, undisputed examples are, well, they're basically non-existent. Okay, so let's bring the cloud back into this whole picture. We know terrorists use the internet as a tool, but the big question is, does the cloud make them better at it, or does it actually make things harder for them? Well, on the one hand, you can see the appeal. I mean, why build your own computer servers when you can just rent super powerful ones for cheap? The services are reliable, they give you a layer of anonymity, and pretty much anyone with a credit card can access them from anywhere in the world. But, and this is a big but, using major cloud services is really a double-edged sword. Think about it.
These platforms, run by giants like Amazon and Microsoft, have insane security budgets. They're incredibly well defended. And while an attacker might seem anonymous at first, eventually their actions can be traced back to the provider, who can and often does work with law enforcement.
But here's a new wrinkle in all this, and it's kind of disturbing. Malware as a service. Basically, you can now just go online and rent or buy incredibly sophisticated hacking tools. This completely lowers the bar. You don't have to be a genius hacker anymore to launch a pretty serious attack. And this super fast evolution of technology leads us to one of the biggest hurdles in this whole field, the law. To understand just how big of a problem this is, our source material brings up this fantastic analogy. It's called the law of the horse.
Years ago, a judge named Frank Easterbrook made this argument. He said creating a special field called cyber law is like creating a law of the horse. Technology just moves too fast. By the time you actually write, debate, and pass a law, the technology it was designed for has already changed, making the law totally useless. And this law of the horse problem creates this absolute mess of real-world legal nightmares. First, attribution. How in the world do you prove who is actually sitting at the keyboard? Then, jurisdiction. If an attack bounces between 10 different countries, which countries' laws even apply? Then you've got cooperation. Key countries like Russia and China haven't signed on to international cybercrime agreements. And finally, free speech. Where do you draw the line between protected speech and dangerous propaganda? It's a legal minefield.
This case with the French TV network TV5 Monde is a perfect example of these problems in action. The network gets hacked, and at first everyone blames this ISIS-affiliated group. But then later evidence points to a totally different culprit, a group linked to the Russian government. That's the attribution problem right there. And even if you could prove who did it, trying to get legal cooperation or extradite someone, it's pretty much a diplomatic impossibility. So after all of that, where does that leave us? We've seen that real cyberterrorism is incredibly rare, but the tools to carry it out are getting easier to find, and our legal system is just struggling to keep up. And that leads to a pretty unsettling conclusion. Our source material leaves us with this really sobering thought. Maybe the only reason we haven't seen a truly catastrophic cyber-terrorist attack yet is because, for now, physical attacks are just easier and more effective for terrorists. But as technology keeps evolving, that could change. As one expert put it, the question might not be if we'll see an attack like this, but when. And that's the final thought I want to leave you with. With technology like AI and the Internet of Things exploding and changing everything at a pace we've never seen before, is our legal system, which was designed for an old-world physical reality, still stuck playing by the law of the horse?